name's Ruby, I'm a piano tuner and I run Ruby Tunes. I've created this video for you, my customers, because so many of you, when you first contact me, have not had your piano tuned in the last 12 months. Maybe it's been a couple of years, maybe it's been a couple of decades, and you're certainly not alone, and I wanted to make this video to help you know what to expect from your upcoming tuning appointment. When I first arrive at your home, the questions I'm going to be asking are, do you know when the piano was last tuned? And do you know if the piano has been tuned regularly in its lifetime? And if you don't know the answer to those questions, that is fine. We will discover together. But if you do know the answers, that information is so useful to me, far more useful than knowing what the make or the model number is. That information allows me to get a sense of what this piano might need in the appointment and give you an accurate estimate of the time and the cost of that treatment. Please be honest and don't feel worried. I'm not going to judge you. I'm not going to tell you off. That is not my job. I'm here to bring your piano back to life. So my first analogy is to think about your piano, which is a piece of mechanical engineering, in the same way that you might think about a car, which is a piece of mechanical engineering, albeit made from very different materials and for very different purposes. So a car has to be MOT'd once a year. If your car, for example, has not been MOT'd for 5 years, you wouldn't expect to take it into the garage and for it to pass with flying colours. If the car is a good make and if you have been looking after it, then it might not need too much work. There might be things that need replenishing, perhaps a few parts that need replacing or repairing. Sometimes there might be more work required, and it may be that because a problem which has been under the surface has been left unchecked, it's turned into a bigger problem which needs a bigger and more expensive solution. So that's one way to think about your piano. Let's get more specific. We're going to think about the strings in the piano in the same way that we think about the muscles in our body. So let's imagine that you go to a yoga class once a week, and for you this is enough. It keeps you supple, you feel comfortable, it's the level of fitness that you need. Now let's imagine that you stop going to those weekly yoga classes and it's been a while. When you come back to that class, even though the class is exactly the same, it doesn't feel the same in your body. You feel stiff, you feel tight, your muscles resist the movement, and it can feel really uncomfortable, and if you're not careful, you can pull something. Well, this is exactly the same with the strings in the piano. Now, they only need a workout once or twice a year, which is the tuning, but if they don't get that stretch once or twice a year, then when we come back to them in several years' time, they're not going to be as supple. They're going to resist the tuning. They're going to want to contract back to that place where they were before. So even though the piano might not have fallen too far flat, it's still a big deal to try and tune it. So what happens in that instance is that the piano needs an extended session. So we tune the piano and then we come back to notes, and sometimes they'll have already started to contract back. And so we take a second pass at those notes. So that's what I call an extended tuning session, and that normally adds about an hour onto the tuning session, or up to an hour, and the prices are all on my website, and it's all to do with the time that it takes. Whilst you've been looking for a piano tuner, you might have come across the phrase concert pitch, and you're wondering, what is concert pitch, and is my piano at concert pitch? So what if I told you middle C is not real? So pitch is this big sliding scale of sound that starts with notes that are far lower than what we have on the piano and far higher than what we have on the piano. And at some point in Western musical culture, we discovered this thing we called an octave. We divided it into 12 semitones, and on that sliding scale we placed a point in the map and we said that's going to be middle C. The trouble was, not everybody's middle C was exactly the same. So we had orchestras going from venue to venue, and they'd arrive at a new venue and they'd find suddenly their instruments didn't sound like they were in tune. And that was because they tuned them to the piano at the previous venue, which was slightly different from the piano at the current venue. And so at some point in history, we all got together and said, we have to synchronize this. We have to find a way to measure it and make it precise for everyone across the board. If you're nerdy like me, you might be interested to know that the same thing happened with time. It used to be that the time, say, in Manchester was slightly different to the time in London, and it was only when we started taking trains from one to the other that we realised that we needed to be in sync. So we got ourselves in sync. We did the same with pitch. So we decided that the A above middle C, which is the note that orchestras always tune to, was going to be 440 hertz, which means 440 beats per second. And this is something that we can all measure and we can all agree on. And then all the other notes on the piano are calculated from that note. So if your piano is at concert pitch, it means that A4, the A above middle C, is at 440 hertz, and all the other notes of the piano are based from that one note. Let's imagine that your piano was tuned to 440 hertz to concert pitch. Now, even the world's greatest piano tuner cannot make a piano stay in tune forever. They are living, breathing things. They're affected by their environments. They will always go out of tune. Now, over the course of a year, a piano that's in good condition and kept in a reasonably stable environment, it's not left outside in the snow, for example, will usually fluctuate by about 5% of a semitone. Now, that number isn't actually really important for what we're talking about today, and I'm going to create a diagram to try and explain this. Hello, and welcome to my very accurate diagram. So, let's go back to our sliding scale of pitch, which is going to be represented by this squiggly line here. And let's say, for argument's sake, we are tuning middle C, a note that we all know and love. And this piano is at concert pitch. A4 is 440 hertz, and we've done our calculations. We know where middle C needs to be, and we're going to call that measurement point C. So, it's been a year, your piano needs a tuning, and we come to the piano and we find that it's no longer at point C. It's fallen ever so slightly flat, and it's here at point X. Now, as I mentioned before, this is about 5% of a semitone flat. The number's not important here. What's important is that this distance is pretty small. And in fact, we would still say that this piano is at pitch. It's at concert pitch, because this interval is so small that I'd say even people who claim to have perfect pitch probably wouldn't spot it. So, maybe it's been more than a year, and because your piano's quite a good condition and it's been well looked after, it might not have slipped further away than point X, but there is that resistance, and so sometimes we have to do that second pass, as I explained earlier. Now let's imagine that it's been more than a year, it's been maybe more than 5 years, and we find that our piano has slipped all the way here to point Z. Now, as you can see, the distance between point Z and point C is so much bigger than the distance between point X and point C. And so we can't approach this tuning normally. We can't just tune the strings as we normally would, because the distance that we're having to tune them by is so significant that they will almost certainly contract, and you'll find that you've tuned your piano from point Z to point C, and by the time you get back to a note, it's already slipped to point X. And so we need to take a different approach and do something called a pitch raise. So, your piano is at point Z. We would say that your piano is no longer at concert pitch, that it's fallen away from concert pitch, and in order to get back to concert pitch, we need to perform a pitch raise, sometimes also called an overpull tuning. So, this is how we do it. Instead of tuning our piano, taking it from point Z to point C, we're going to take it beyond point C to point Y. The reason that we do this is because we know the strings are going to contract. So when we take it to point Y, by the time we come back round to the start again, the strings will have already started to go a little bit flat, but will hopefully be going flat. And this is all measured very accurately, and there's lots of sums you have to do to work this out. It will actually have fallen back to more or less point C, where we want the piano to be. We will then tune the piano for a second time, and on that second time we will just be nudging those notes, making sure it is exactly at point C and in line. So we call that a pitch raise. So it's a double tuning session, if you like. The first tuning is our overpull, where we stretch a bit, and then the second tuning is our fine tuning. Maybe you find yourself with a piano that is not at concert pitch. It's at our point Z on the map. And you're thinking to yourself, does my piano actually have to be at concert pitch? And the answer is no. A pitch raise is an option, but it's not necessarily necessary. This is a discussion I have almost every day as a piano tuner, and something I'm really happy to talk through with you on the day. So the reasons why I would recommend having that pitch raise to get your piano back up to concert pitch is if you use your piano to accompany other instruments or singing. In those cases, if you've got a violinist and the piano's flat, then that person is playing the violin flat. They're having to move their fingering flat, and that could be really unhelpful, especially if they're learning. Also, if you play along to YouTube, let's say, or if you have one of those piano learning apps, sometimes if a piano is too flat, the app won't even recognise the notes, and it probably won't sound very nice. So that might mean a pitch raise is the right option for you. And just generally, if you've got somebody who's really serious about being a musician, then having your piano off concert pitch is going to really affect their oral learning skills. And that's not just important for associated board exams, it's important for your life as a musician. All those learning by ear skills are really important, and it's really going to affect that if your piano isn't at concert pitch. But if you play the piano at home for pleasure, by yourself, for yourself, or if you've got a small child at home and you're not sure whether they're going to take to it or not, then you absolutely don't have to spend the money and get that pitch raise. You can have what we call an offset tuning, where essentially we have our piano at point Z, and instead of tuning it to point C, we're just going to tune it to point Z. Now you might be thinking, but my piano's out of tune and you're telling me you're going to tune it out of tune. Well, yes, that's true. But let me try and explain to you why your piano sounds out of tune. Because the chances are, when you hear your piano and say, yeah, that's out of tune, you're not saying that because you can hear that it's fallen flat of concert pitch. You're saying that because the unisons are not equal. Very brief word on unisons, because this is where it starts to get quite complicated and I don't want to overwhelm people, just want to explain why your piano sounds so out of tune. So, most notes on the piano from sort of the third octave upwards have more than one string to the note. So the hammer, you press the key, it moves the hammer hits the strings because there's actually 2 or 3 of them. And the reason you have more is to create a thicker sound. So let's say you've got your 3 strings. Now these strings have sound waves associated with them, and when those strings are just ever so slightly out of tune with each other, those sound waves clash against each other and they create this really like wavy sound that has beats in it. And you might not hear the beats, but you might hear this like tinny sound, or kind of wah wah, honky tonky, all these different words people use to describe that sound. So what you're hearing is not that the note is flat, but that several strings are sounding at once and they're just ever so slightly not in tune with each other. And so when we do our offset tuning, when we tune our piano to point Z rather than taking it up to point C, we are still eliminating this clash by unifying our unisons. It's just that the point at which we're tuning them to is slightly flatter than concert pitch. So that gets rid of that wah-wah, honky-tonky, wavy, beaty sound and replaces it with something that is pure, that sounds clear, that sounds calm and balanced, but is technically a bit flat. If you have made it to this point in the video, I am seriously impressed. Well done. I hope that that all makes a little bit more sense to you now. If it doesn't, please don't worry. You're always welcome to email me before your appointment, but also we are absolutely going to talk about this stuff on the day. So thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you soon.